I'd like to show you how you can use georeference aerial photos, in this case from 1942 and 1953, and some ground truthing to figure out some interesting impacts of forests, in this case on the Sunapee Ridge. So this is actually a nice photo from April of 2016 because when you zoom in, you can even see individual trees really well. You can see this ledge, which I've kind of highlighted in blue. All of these are the main trail. All of these areas are places where I've walked using the Gaia app. So let's start here. The first thing I'm just going to note to you is notice how all these trees, the texture looks different in this whole area than it does in this area. So in 1938, there was a big hurricane, and I'm just gonna have to take my word for it for a second, but it really toppled a lot of trees out here, like it did in a lot of places, but only on the east side, not on the west side, apparently. So these are the 1942, so 4 years later. And what's interesting is you can see this, it just kind of looks like a funny area, like there's trees down, and I think that's what it is. Also note that this whole area here, which I noted in the 2016 photos, looks a little different than this area. It looks different in the 42. In fact, you can see these areas that look like sort of, I'm going to call them fingers going into the spruce, dense spruce fir. So go to the 2016, and again, you can see even, 70 years later, roughly, you can see that this part of the forest looks very different than this. Look, they're more spaced out. They're obviously bigger. And when you go out there and look at them, that's exactly how you see the difference. This is what you see in those older trees that have never, or it's been a long, long time since they've been cut. Here's what the forest looks like in the area that burned really hard, all the way down to mineral soil, to ledge. So here are those 1942 again. What's kind of neat is if you look at that same area with 1953 aerials, look, there are those fingers, and all of this is burned, probably right down to the mineral soil. Um, so two places where I'm going to show you real quickly here, and these are not georeferenced perfectly. Keep that in mind. So if you walk along some of these areas, and what I tried to do is when I found big trees, I walked along more or less along them. Same thing here. This is a really cool tree because this area burned, and right on the edge of where this tree was and still is living, it didn't burn. And this is a fire scar. So I've learned from other people that these triangular like marks are fire scars. This is what's happened to the tree 70 some years later. It's still alive, but the heartwood here is dead, but it healed over. So I just find that fascinating. But it's neat because this is good documentation that this is on the edge of where the fire did not burn everything. See how there's still trees in this area, but right next to it, it did burn everything. Let me see if I can find the right photo here to show you. Here's just another big tree that's right next to it. So this is kind of a neat thing too. The trees that are leaning, and this might actually be the one exception, but the trees that are leaning out there, almost every single one of them is a certain size, about 18 to 22 inches in diameter. Most are yellow birches, but some are sugar maple like this one, and they're leaning due west. They're leaning due west, and that, in fact, what was so neat I've learned is that that's what the hurricane typically did, was knock trees over, so they were leaning completely due west. That's just a neat photo of a neat root. So presumably there was soil that this root was growing in at one point, and now the soil's gone. It's possible that that soil eroded away after the fire got rid of a lot of the other plants and stuff that were out there. Here's another potential fire scar. So it's just kind of neat. You can look through in georeference. Here's one. I think this is looking, let me make sure. I think it's looking in this direction, so looking north. And of course, all the trees that are there are small. In fact, there's even white birch, which is not common except in areas that are really heavily disturbed. Out here, this is looking out to the east and north, maybe a little bit. All young trees. These trees are the ones that have grown back. Maybe there was another forest of white birch or something in here, but these are the ones that have grown back almost 80 years later. Let me see if I can find another cool one. Yeah, it's just bigger maple, I think. So those are some of the kind of cool things you can see. And if you go through, this is an area that has a lot of old growth. You can see how this burned. There's fire marks all over. In fact, from what everyone that I've talked to who knows about this, the fire started somewhere around here, probably, and it ended up burning down slope and then, of course, upslope. So you can go out to some of these areas that didn't get hit by the hurricane, excuse me, or the fire. And there's actually, it's hard to tell, but there's actually a pretty high density of big trees. It's really neat. This is a really, really big one that happens to be out there. So I've been able to use this in the spruce fir forest out in this area, but also in the hardwood area to really document where there are trees that burn and where they did not burn. So kind of a cool thing. Last one I'll leave you on is this is an area, all of this burned right to the edge of this one. So from here north, the forest looks completely different than it does from here south and east. And this might be a fire scar that's healed over on this spruce tree. So who knows how old that is? It's really not a very large tree, but they're growing in some pretty difficult conditions.